So you think you work better under pressure, but what if you were wrong? What if that's just a story you've been telling yourself? Because here's what actually happens. You don't do the work until you have to, until the deadline is close, until the pressure is on, until there's no other choice. And then you do it. And you do it well. And you think, see, I work better under pressure. But here's the problem. You're not working better, you're just working scared. And that's not sustainable. That's not healthy. And it's keeping you stuck in a pattern that's exhausting you. So let's talk about why pressure makes you productive and why that's actually the problem. So, why does pressure make you productive? Well, the first reason is because pressure forces you to stop overthinking. And when the deadline is close, you don't have time to perfect it. You don't have time to second guess every decision. You don't have time to analyze every possible outcome. You just have to do it. So pressure eliminates the overthinking that normally paralyzes you. It shuts down the voice that says, well, what if it isn't good enough? What if I'm doing it wrong? What if there's a better way? And in that moment, you're finally able to move forward. But here's the problem. You're not solving the overthinking. You're just forcing yourself to ignore it. And the next time you have a project without a looming deadline, the overthinking comes right back because you haven't actually dealt with it. You just learn to work around it when you have no other choice. And the second reason is because pressure gives you permission to do it imperfectly. When you have time, you think it needs to be perfect. You think you need to get it just right. You think anything less than your best work isn't worth putting out there. But when you're out of time, good enough becomes acceptable. You lower your standards because you have to, because the deadline doesn't care if it's perfect. It just cares if it's done. So pressure does the job of lowering your standards for you. And that's why you get it done. Not because you're more productive under pressure, but because pressure forces you to let go of perfectionism. But here's the issue. You're relying on urgency to override your perfectionism instead of actually letting go of perfectionism. So you're still holding on to the belief that things should be perfect. You're just using deadlines to bypass that belief temporarily. And that means you'll never be able to start early. Because without the pressure, well, you're back to thinking it has to be perfect. And perfect never feels achievable. So you don't start. And the third reason is because pressure creates artificial motivation, fear of missing the deadline, fear of letting people down, fear of the consequences if you don't deliver. And that fear drives you to act. It gives you the energy that you need to push through. It makes the work feel urgent and important. And for a little while, that works. But motivation from fear is exhausting. It's not sustainable, and it doesn't last beyond the immediate crisis. So as soon as the deadline passes, well, the motivation disappears, and you're back to square one, waiting for the next deadline to create the next wave of fear based motivation. And that cycle wears you out because you're constantly running on adrenaline, constantly in fight or flight mode, constantly pushing yourself to perform under stress. And that takes a toll. And the fourth reason is because you've trained yourself to associate productivity with panic. Every time you wait until the last minute and pull it off, you reinforce the pattern. Your brain learns I only work when it's urgent. I only get things done when I'm under pressure. I only perform when there's no other option. And over time, that becomes your default mode. You start to believe that you need the pressure, that you can't work without it, that you're just someone who thrives under stress. But you're not thriving, you're surviving. And the more you rely on pressure to get things done, the harder it becomes to start anything early because your brain has learned that there's no point in starting until the pressure actually shows up. So you're stuck, waiting for urgency, waiting for panic, waiting for the deadline to actually force your hand. And that's not productivity. That's procrastination with a backup plan. So here's the real problem. You think you work better under pressure, but what you're really doing is burning yourself out with constant stress. You're reinforcing the belief that you can't work without panic. You're making it impossible to start things early because there's no urgency yet. And you're living in a constant state of low level anxiety about the next deadline. And that's not sustainable. And it's not working as well as you think it is. So, what do you do instead? Well, the first thing you need to do is create artificial deadlines before the real ones. Don't wait for urgency to show up naturally. Create it yourself. Set your own deadline, let's say 3 days before the real one. Tell someone about it for accountability or put it on your calendar. Treat it like it's real. And this gives you the pressure without the actual panic. It forces you to start earlier and it breaks the pattern of waiting until the last second. And over time, you'll start to realize that you don't actually need the real deadline to get things done. You just need a deadline, any deadline. The second thing you need to do is start before you feel ready. The reason you wait is because starting feels overwhelming. You think you need to have it all figured out before you even begin. You think you need to know exactly what you're doing. You think you need to feel prepared. But starting doesn't require readiness. It just requires that you take the first step. So take one small action before the pressure kicks in. Open the document, write the first sentence, sketch out an outline, do something, anything that moves you forward. Because once you start, momentum will build. And momentum makes it easier to keep going. But if you wait for pressure, well, now you're training your brain that starting requires urgency. And that's not true. Starting just requires action. And the third thing you need to do is lower your standards on purpose. Not because you're out of time, not because you're rushing, but because done is better than perfect. Give yourself permission to do it imperfectly from the beginning, not as a backup plan, but as the plan. Decide that good enough is the goal and start from there. This removes the need for pressure to force you into good enough mode because you're already there. And once you give yourself permission to be imperfect without needing a deadline to justify it, you'll find it's a lot easier to start early. And the fourth thing you need to do is recognize that working better under pressure is really just a lie that you've told yourself. You don't work better under pressure. You work differently, sure. You work faster, yes. But you're also more stressed, more reactive, less thoughtful, more prone to mistakes. What you're actually good at is pulling things off in a crisis. And that's a valuable skill, don't get me wrong. But it's not a sustainable way to work. So stop treating pressure as your productivity tool and start treating it as the warning sign that you've waited too long. Because the goal isn't to work well under pressure necessarily. The goal is to not need the pressure in the first place. So here's what I want you to think about. When was the last time you started something early without waiting for the deadline to push you to do it? And what would it take to prove to yourself that you can work without the panic? Because you can, you just have to stop convincing yourself that you need the permission and the pressure to perform and start trusting that you're capable of working without it. If you are an overthinker and you want more support on your journey as you work through whatever's keeping you stuck, you can explore the options to work with me by going to natehooks.com. The link is in the description below. And until next time, remember, the goal isn't to work well under pressure. The goal is to not need the pressure in the first place.